Good afternoon, all. Thank you. All good to go? Well, firstly, happy International Nurses Day, and in a moment you'll hear from one. But first, we went into Parliament today determined to ask questions about where the latest health data is. It's now deep into 2022, and we still don't have one skerrick of data for this calendar year. Not one bit, nearly halfway through the year. We now know why. The reason why we haven't seen the data is because the government is working on a scheme to cook it up, to change it, to fudge the figures. And this is something that Queenslanders should be deeply concerned about. And it is something that we are going to prosecute hard, because if you are serious about driving change, you are serious about openness and transparency. And in a moment, I'm going to ask Brent Mickelberg to speak about why that is important and why data management matters, and Ros will talk about what this means at the coalface. But make no mistake, the government is more interested in fudging figures to save itself than fixing ambulance ramping to save Queenslanders. And this is deeply concerning. Today, on the floor of Parliament, the Minister had an opportunity, the Premier had an opportunity, and subsequently the Deputy Premier had an opportunity to rule this out. Now, if you have a look at the correspondence, there is no doubt at all that a senior departmental official from Queensland Health is doing this in a bid to try and make the government look better. Not to fix ambulance ramping, but to make the government look better. To the great credit of the ambulance service, they have pushed back, and they have said that this won't drive the cultural change that is needed. Now, the Minister had a chance to say, this isn't our agenda. We rule this out. This isn't good for Queensland, it's not good for Queensland Health, and it's not good for openness and transparency. But they left the door ajar, and that is a bad thing for openness and transparency. And I'm sorry, but this is serious and it matters. Because if you want to fix a problem, you have to be open about it, and you have to be prepared to measure the same consistent set of data. And we are going to prosecute this hard on behalf of every Queenslander who has suffered. Because if we don't get this right, it will impact the quality of healthcare. And Brent will explain that in a moment. But first, on International Nurses Day, I hand over to you, Ros.
Thank you. Ros Bates, Shadow Minister for Ambulance Services. Well, what a slap in the face to all my hard-working frontline colleagues on International Nurses Day. I have said before that patients will die on the ramp. They died on the ramp under Bligh, and it will happen under Palaszczuk. Today we asked the Health Minister to categorically rule out fudging the times of ambulance arrival times, and she has failed to do that. So just let me take you through what happens right now. So a paramedic turns up on the ramp, they push a button at the hospital, they push a button on their iPad, and the clock starts. What the government currently want to do is to push the button once the patient has been triaged. Now that can take up to 30 minutes depending on how busy the ramp is and how many patients are actually inside. So this is nothing more than fudging the figures to make it look like ambulance ramping has improved when all they're doing is ignoring the fact that patients can be waiting minimum of 30 minutes before they even start the clock.
Brent.
Thank you. Afternoon all. Brent Mickelberg, Shadow Minister for Open Data. Well, the state government's bid to fudge the hospital data will result in more Queenslanders dying. It will result in more Queenslanders dying on a hospital ramp and in their home waiting for an ambulance to arrive that is waiting to go into a hospital. We heard today the Health Minister say that she holds this data, but she doesn't think Queenslanders deserve to receive the data. The question has to be asked why the Health Minister thinks that Queenslanders do not deserve the data in relation to performance of the hospital system. Queenslanders deserve that data because they deserve to have confidence in the health system. They deserve to have confidence in a health system that is run by the state government and is not coping at the moment. Open data is about driving transparency. It's about driving performance across the hospital system. By benchmarking and by providing open and transparent data, Queenslanders can have confidence that some of the issues currently afflicting the health system are being remediated. At the moment, they can't have that confidence. In fact, we've seen the opposite. We've seen a culture of secrecy from the top down that seeks to hide the truth rather than address the problem. And Queenslanders deserve better. So the message to the Health Minister and to the Premier and to the Deputy Premier is to release health data in a timely manner. Other states can do this. Why can't Queensland do this?
Amber. Her response to the change was clear. Take that for negative. She said, don't do it.
But when asked directly, do you rule this out, she refused to. And the Premier did the same. And just now, the Deputy Premier said the Health Minister's response was very clear. And then when there was a subsequent question, he said he wasn't the Health Minister. And then he said that he doesn't believe there's plans for that. That's the non-answer of the year. Rule it out. A good minister would say, yeah, these were discussions, but I looked at it, I'm not comfortable with it, and it's not happening. And that would have been issue over. But they're leaving the door ajar. They're leaving the door ajar because Queensland's got the worst ambulance ramping in the nation. And rather than fix the problem, the government wants to fudge the figures. That is next level in an integrity crisis that's gripping this government. The Minister confirmed that herself, that the conversations are happening, and the Minister said that it wasn't her plan. And I'll accept that at face value. But why then not rule it out? So if it's not your plan, say that it's somebody else's idea, say that you're not comfortable with it, and then rule it out into the future. This is deeply concerning. This is deeply concerning for a number of reasons. If you don't get data that is comparable, you will not be able to measure if a system is improving or deteriorating. That's the first thing. The second thing is data enables you to make a case for where resources need to be spent. So that is a matter in the case of health or life or death. So if you know where the system is failing, you can address it adequately by putting resources. But this government, it's all about how things look. It's never about how things are. It's never about fixing a problem that matters to Queenslanders. It's always about fixing a political problem that matters to them. And I'm sorry, but this cannot stand. And I'm sure there's no one in the medical profession who's comfortable about this. And to the QAS that pushed back, commendations to your officers, because they saw it for what this is. To the Deputy Director General, well, I'm more worried about fixing the system rather than fixing the politics for your minister. And I'm pretty sure this is something that maybe Mr Coldrake will look at in time as well. You've got to fix the problem. This isn't about politics. We have the worst ambulance ramping in the nation. Categoric. That is fact. And instead of fixing the ramping, they want to fix the data. That's not the way good governments operate. And the integrity of this government is lying in a pile of rubble on the floor. And rather than try and pick it up and cobble together some sort of semblance of a government that acts with integrity, they just slink to new lows. And this is all about, let's see if we can get away with this. Let's see if we can kick the can down the road. Well, we're not going to go away on this. In the same way that I've stood before you, time after time, talking about the need for a Royal Commission into the way that they conduct themselves, we're going to continue to say what the result of this will be. And Brent summed it up perfectly. This will cost Queenslanders their lives. Because if you're not serious about fixing a system, the same thing will continue to happen. And the joy about the data we've got is it's been the same set of data. So you can look at it and you can say when this government came to office, ambulance ramping was at 15% and it's now at 38%. Now, a good minister would want that challenge of being able to drive it down. Bad governments look to fudge figures. Good governments look to fix problems. There was nothing in that motion that I think Queenslanders would be uncomfortable about. If you're asking me whether or not I think it's the biggest priority for this place, well, that's a different question. I look at the challenges for regional Queensland and I see things like health and housing and law and order as being the big issues that this place should be grappling with. And when we get our chance to move motions, I think you would see that I have a firm view of what matters to Queenslanders. But there was nothing in that motion that I think Queenslanders would be overly uncomfortable with.
If there was nothing in the motion, if that was the case, why did none of the LNP members get up to speak on the motion?
Because when I first became opposition leader, I stood up and I said to you that I would repeatedly talk about three things: the economy, service delivery and transparency. The economy, service delivery and transparency. And if you look at this state at the moment, and let's start on the economy, in order to try and prop up the books, we've had a dodgy valuation on a titles office. We've got funds created that's supposedly fixing problems in housing where there's no money attached, funny money. So that's the economic argument. Service delivery, we've got ambulances that simply do not have the ability to turn up and help Queenslanders because the hospital system's in crisis. You've got people who pick up the phone. If there is a police officer available, they don't have the laws to be able to hold young offenders to account. And on transparency, well, how long have you got? This is the most dodgy government that does not believe in conducting itself with accountability or transparency. They are the three things that I said that I was going to focus on. Now, I don't see in that motion anything that fits into those three things.
Shouldn't
So,
the LNP be accountable for votes it's taking on?
sure.
these motions?
And as I said, there is nothing in that motion that I think Queenslanders would be uncomfortable about. But if you're asking me whether or not it's my priority, it doesn't fit into the economy, service delivery or transparency.
We think transgender women should be banned from competing in sport.
Competing against females, yes. And I think that's the view, not just of the majority of Queenslanders, but that's the view of the majority of female sports.
Why is that your view?
Because that's the firm view of the majority of Queenslanders and indeed people in sport. But if you're asking me whether or not I think that's the most pressing issue for this building to deal with, that's a different question.
So the
Why do you
LNP
believe that? Why do you believe that? Are you saying most Queenslanders do? How do you gauge that?
Because I don't think it's a fair, I don't believe that's a fair contest. And I think in sport you want a fair contest. And I think that's fair and reasonable. But again, you're asking me what I think are the issues that matter to Queenslanders, and that isn't something that I'd move a motion about. But if I get presented with a motion, I'm always going to vote on how I think if something is right or not.
so for the LNP, then the candidate also raised the prospect of a bill.
Any bill that gets presented to the Parliament will always be treated with respect and decency under my leadership. And that's been my style throughout, whoever moves it. But when you're asking what sort of bills will be moving, it'll be focused on the economy, service delivery and transparency, time after time. And if there was a sitting tomorrow, here's a tip, there'd be more questions about health and integrity because this government's got a big problem on both of them.
Can I ask about the real-time data? The Minister was suggesting this morning that the release of that data hasn't actually helped in other states. Do you have any examples of how it has helped the situation?
Well, right now, I can get on a phone and I can tell you what the state of the emergency department is in the Tweed Hospital on the other side of the border, but I can't tell you what's happened in January in Queensland. That's deeply troubling. Data drives cultural change. Release of data drives better public expenditure. It also drives accountability, and that's where this government's problem is with data. And I want to go back to where I started. We walked into that Parliament today wanting one thing, and that was a commitment when the Minister will release the data for this year, because we are now well over 100 days into year 2022, and we still don't know what happened in January in hospitals. So we were really focused on trying to get data released for this year. We now know why, and the reason why is they're working on a plan to try and change the metrics to improve the way things look rather than the way they are. Thanks very much, guys. Thank you.